Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. As I told you guys at the previous video, Wesley and Veselin Topalov did go into a Armageddon game, and this is that Armageddon game. It's pretty exciting, has a lot of different features in it, got a lot of notes rolling. But yes, always for my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay. Kamusta na aking magkaibigan. I appreciate you guys very much for coming by. Magandang umaga. 3:06 a.m. over there, so you guys probably are still asleep. But maybe I'll be getting up in the next couple of hours. So I appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Bulgaria, I would say Dober Den and Bogodaria. Yes. I was trying to do it without looking at the sheet. I just recently started doing the Bulgarian, so I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we do see c4, c5. We got g3, g6, bishop to g2, bishop to g7. And we kind of have a little bit of copycat for a minute. We do see knight to c3, knight to c6. We got d3, d6. Queen comes to d2. Okay. Queen comes to d2. And we do have queen coming to a5. Now, something that was probably on Wesley So's mind was playing b2 or b3, bishop to b2, and kind of contesting this bishop with his own bishop. But Tobalov says, man, you know, we're not doing that, bro. You know, we're not even having any of that like development moves. I'm just going to shut that down immediately. And queen to a5 can be kind of annoying in a lot of positions. But we do see e3. We see bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is bishop to d7. Pretty logical move. You know, there isn't a whole lot of, I mean, you can make some other moves, but I mean, you know, bishop coming to g4 isn't really pinning anything. It's not really attacking anything. Bishop coming here just invites e4. You know, you don't really want to put your bishop here, but I mean, you can. But anyway. So we do see this, and we actually see rook to b1. Now, something that was actually really nice to play was actually knight to e2. And then after you have like regular developing moves, knight to f6, castles, you got h3 preventing any bishop to g4 or knight to g4 situations, a rook coming to c8, f4, queen back to c7 and e4. As you can see, you know, white has a really nice pawn center rolling. You know, this king without the dark squared bishop is a little bit less safe. You do kind of have some dark square issues around your king. And without that bishop, you are not as guarded. But like I said, we did see rook over to b1. And we have a long castles by black, which might look kind of, you know, interesting because, you know, you kind of have this rook already on this side. But it's actually super solid. We do see knight to f3. We got f5 because we have castled, well, pretty much we're going to be castling this side. As you guys, I'm sure, are aware, you can't castle on this side anymore because the rook has moved. So we're probably going to be opposite side castling. So getting these pawns rolling are what black is trying to do. We do see queen to b2. And we're trying to see if we can grab a cheapo. I mean, let's see if Topalov forgets that he doesn't like checkmate and gets checkmated in one. But Tobalov says, we're not doing that, man. You know, I'm going queen to c7. You know, protecting everything. And then we do see knight to g5. And, man, you know what? Like, Wesley's going for some cheapos right now. And you know what? Topalov probably gets mad at this point. He probably says, you know what? I'm about to, like, turn it into, like, you know, a whole different gear for you. Because you are trying to, like, get me like I'm a 1,000 player. But he does go rook over to f8. We see f4. The knight comes to f6. We got castles. And then we do have h6. Getting that pesky knight out of g5. The knight does come down to f3. And then we do have b6. And like I said, I mean, this is about as solid as you get. This is like the flying V on the Mighty Ducks. You are not breaking this down. And if you push d4, you know, black is not going to oblige you by taking and allowing you to get like a super duper pawn storm rolling on them. So don't dream of that. We do have a4. We got knight over to a5, just making sure that pawn doesn't go anywhere at all. We see queen over to c2. The bishop comes down to c6. You know, the bishop really isn't doing anything on this diagonal, so this is like a perfect move to make to contest this bishop over here. So like I said, we do see bishop to c6, and we have actually reached a point in the game. Wesley So plays a move in this position that completely changes the whole like flow of the game. If you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what move that is, go ahead and do so. Okay, it's not really that serious. It doesn't really change like, completely everything, but it is a really interesting move that he plays, and the move is rook to b5. So he is willing to give up the exchange for this bishop. This bishop is actually pretty strong. If he can get rid of this bishop, it just makes this bishop that much stronger. And he does have the ability to try to, correct his pawn structure after pawn takes b5. But we don't see that. Topalov says, man, you know what, bro? I don't believe that. I think that my position is better. I don't even need your rook. So he goes rook h to g8, which is the correct move to play. We do see knight down to d2. We see bishop taking g2, king taking g2. And we have gotten rid of white's really, really strong piece. So, the king is a lot less protected than he was before. So black is definitely in the driver's seat of this position. And we do have the move e5. And Topalov he's actually playing the heck out of this position, man. I mean, he's doing everything that you want to do. He's trading off protected pieces around the king. He's starting to get these pawns rolling and stuff like that. These rooks are in the correct spots to be, attacking. He just kind of needs to like do something with this knight. Maybe Fianchetto it, move it somewhere else so it can start to kind of get in on the action too. But I mean, white definitely needs to figure out what they're doing with this bishop because it's been sitting on its starting square pretty much all day. So we do see a rook or king down to g1. We see a rook over to e8. Pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, and then we do see e4. And we are trying to take advantage of the fact that this knight is just kind of hanging out in space. And it doesn't have any protectors. So all its homies are not protecting him right now. So he's all by himself, all alone. So the queen does step over to d7. We're just anticipating if pawn takes, we're going to be able to hold this pawn, and we're good to go. And Wesley is like in a situation where he's like, man, he has to try to make something happen. Because his pieces are kind of jumbled up over here. So he needs to kind of open some lines. He needs to get stuff rolling. So we do see rook takes a5, which is actually like a pretty nice move in the position. It's definitely a legitimate, exchange sacrifice. So the rook takes a5. We see pawn taking a5. And now we've kind of created some weaknesses on black side of the board. The knight comes to b3. So we do have knight to a5s, knight to c5s coming. And so we're actually looking at, trying to get, ourselves in a much better position. You do kind of want to take this pawn because you do have like two pawns blocking the queen side. So you're not like, it's not like you taking this a pawn is just going to completely just open the position up. But you do have to worry about bishop coming up here, the rook side stepping over here or over here. And you do kind of have a little bit of play. So Topalov definitely plays this position like a little bit more defensively than the computer would. But, that's the computer. So we do see rook over to d8. We see knight taking c5 because, like I said, we created some pawn weaknesses in black's camp. And if we can get these pawns rolling, we can definitely put black in a defensive position. And as you can see right now, everything is like fairly equal. So we do see queen over to c6. And then we see the knight actually retreat back to b3. Now, a move that stuck out to me when I was watching this game and I was seeing the position was this bishop to a3. I was like, man, that should be good because this knight is like super duper well placed. It's protecting everything. So why not go bishop to a3? Jan Gustafsson was mentioning bishop to e3 can run into knight to g4, but that actually doesn't work immediately. It's actually much better for white. But like I said, bishop to a3 just looked really good to me. It holds the knight. It pretty much keeps the position solid. And so, I feel like that was something. But like I said, after the bishop would come to e3, you cannot play knight to g4 immediately. You are just going to be going queen to e2. And we're not worried about this knight taking because the queen is just going to take. And I mean, you have the piece taken care of. And then the rook is going to be swinging over. So you're just good to go. So you probably want to go pawn takes e4. And then the queen goes to b2. I will say, though, bishop to a3 is a much easier move to play. Just simply because it's not as complicated as bishop to e3. As you guys notice, after you go bishop to e3 in this position, you know, black is going to go pawn to e4, and you have to know to go queen to b2 because taking here is not the best option for you, because then knight to g4 is an option. So you have to be careful with that. So like I said, bishop to a3 just kind of seemed like it was like a really nice move to play, but we did see the knight coming back to b3. We see pawn taking e4, and what we are hoping for as black is that we take back here, and this allows the knight to hop into e4, and e4 is a really, really beautiful square for this knight to be on. But Wesley So says, I don't want any of that, so he decides he's going to go ahead and go d4. And of course, if we see pawn takes, we're going to take back with the pawn, and we actually have a really nice pawn, storm rolling on the queen side, which is where you want a pawn storm to be rolling. So we do see e3. You know, the pawn is pretty much going to be disappearing anyway, so you might as well try to be as dynamic as possible with it. Also, this is important because it is freeing up the e4 square, which is where Topalov wanted to go to begin with. So that is making that little bit of difference. So we do see d5 trying to disconnect the queen and this square, so the knight can't just pop down. And also trying to like move the queen somewhere so that we could pick up the rook or the knight. So we do see queen taking c4, and this is exactly what happens. The queen takes on c4, and then the rook takes f6. But something that I will talk about is this e pawn is very, very strong. It's actually much stronger than even a piece, because as you guys can see, black is completely dominating this position. Even though they are down a piece, white is down in exchange, but they have to worry about trying to corral this pawn. And as of right now, they don't have the ability to do so. We see bishop to d2 because, of course, we were just queening on e1, so we have to do something about that. We have rook taking d5, the bishop coming down to e1. We see rook down to d1, and the rook is perfectly sitting on this square. And the only saving move is king to f2 for now. We do see rook a g going over to d8, just doubling, preparing to take here as well. If we could take here, the king taking back, the rook going down, we are going to be forcing the queen in a really like bad spot. So the queen does take g6. This does drop the knight, but I think in Wesley So's short calculation, he was going to get so much play because he's getting this pawn. He's going to get this pawn. He's going to be checking all over the place, and maybe there's something like, maybe there's a killer blow in there somewhere. So we do see queen to f5 with check. The king goes over to b8. We see queen to e5 with check. The king goes over to a8. And like I said, I think this is what Wesley So was seeing. He's thinking there has to be something, rolling in this position. The queen takes e2. So, I mean, like I said, I mean, you're down the exchange, but you are starting to clear off, black's pawns. And then we do see queen up to b7. And it is at this point in the game that it is a very critical point where, like, Wesley So has a decision to make. Is he going to capture another pawn, or is he going to play a defensive move like a rook to f4? And what he decides to do, which actually like is probably one of the worst moves in the position, is actually taking on h6. And this allows black to just completely just get in steamroll. And we see rook to b1. The king goes down to g1 because this queen was threatening to infiltrate onto the h1 square. We do see rook up to b2, just harassing the queen. So I'll go back from this point. If we go back to that position that we had, like I said, the critical point, you could actually play rook to f4 and survive this position. The rook would come down to f4. You would see the same thing, rook over to b1. The queen would come up to e4, and this would be forcing a trade of forcing a trade because the rook can't come down because this rook is going to come up and this queen is pinned, so that would be mating. So we do have to go into this trade. Rook takes e4, rook takes e4. But as you can see, white has a much better pawn structure. They do have an extra pawn, and they have this pass pawn right here. So, I mean, everything is basically being protected and held. You know, we don't have the ability to just swing down here because this rook is protecting this bishop. So, I mean, like I said, this is a holdable position. But we did not go into that. Like I said, rook took, and then we got to where this position was here. After the rook came up to b2 to challenge the queen did step down to f1. We see rook over to e8. We see the rook over to f6. We got rook down to b1. The king comes up to f2. We see rook taking e1, and it is in this position that Wesley So resigns the game. And, I mean, as you guys can really see, I mean, you're pretty much going to have to give up the queen. If not, I mean, you're just looking at a rook up down to e2, and you're going to be, you know, just pretty much losing the game. The only really thing that you can go into is queen taking e1, but you will be seeing queen to b2 with check. The king would come down to f1. The rook would take e1 with check. The king would take e1, but then you would be losing your rook. And that is pretty much the only the only continuation that you can really legitimately go into. So that is the end of that game. So unfortunately, you know, Wesley So did go down in this one. So Malakas C. Veselin Topalov. But I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. Bogo Daria and Meraming Salamat Aking Makai Bigan. And I will see everybody next time.